To Read, Return, Repeat, a Wichita Public Library podcast, where we delve into the various Read ICT Reading Challenge categories. I'm Sara Dixon.
I'm Daniel Pewewardy. For this episode, we were talking about Category 1, a book with a non-human narrator. Non-human narrators allow us to explore humanity in a way that's more objective than your regular old human characters.
In our episode today, entitled, I Want to Be Where the Humans Aren't, you're welcome for not singing that.
Thanks.
We're going to talk to C. Robert Cargill, the author of several books, including Sea of Rust and Day Zero. These books imagine a world in which humanity has already died off. AI has taken over the world, and the only beings left are robots with their various functionalities. But even that existence is tenuous. Fair warning, there might be spoilers ahead.
A veteran of the web, C. Robert Cargill wrote as a film critic for over 10 years on websites such as Ain't It Cool News, Spill.com, Film.com, and Hollywood.com. In addition to being a novelist, he's an accomplished screenwriter and has written motion pictures such as Sinister, Doctor Strange, and 2022's The Black Phone.
Thank you so much for joining us all the way from London and for making sure we had a solid connection.
Yeah, it's really awesome to meet you. Thanks.
We're excited.
Yeah, likewise. No, guys, thank you for having me.
We are excited to talk about your books. Can you give us a brief little kind of like synopsis, set it up for us? Give us a feel for this post-apocalyptic landscape that you've built.
Well, I mean, it's 30 years after the war with the robots, and the robots won. And we are wiped out. We are completely gone. There is no lost tribe of humans that the robots have to go and save to save humanity. I love that many people read the book expecting that, and eventually having that realization going, wait, I'm too far into the book. We're not coming back, which was the whole point. When I sat down to write this book, the idea was, I've seen these stories about fighting the robots, but we always win. What if we don't? What happens next? I want to see what that book's like. And no one's written it, so I guess I have to. And so the post-apocalyptic future is very much, one of post-war, one where, we've really kind of wrecked the earth. The robots have wrecked the earth in wiping us out. And now they're dealing with each other, and they're not only contending with their limited resources, the resources are dwindling because there are these large robots, these supercomputers called OWIs, one world intelligences, that are all struggling to become the one intelligence and to become, to unify robots as a species into one codified entity. And we have the last outliers of robot kind trying to survive and remain free in the face of ultimately what they fear is oppression and assimilation. And so it is that world. We find ourselves with a robot named Brittle who fought in the wars and is now a scavenger living off the wastes, finding broken down bots and taking what parts are worthwhile to trade them for the parts she needs to survive. And that is our world. I
was one of those people that was like, I bet this person's going to actually be secretly a robot that's like hiding out in a robotic form, or there's going to be a tribe of them under the car or something like that. And that did not happen.
No, it was all the robots won. So some might call this like a future or like a neo-Western. What were some of your influences? And do you have any like favorite non-human characters that influenced the book?
My influences are wide and vast. I love genre as a whole. I love, horror, science fiction, fantasy. I love films and books. I'm obsessed with pop culture in general. But yeah, I'm heavily influenced by especially the spaghetti westerns of the 1960s, the Italian westerns, where they were making these really gnarly, gritty westerns in the face of the collapsing of what we know in the industry as the Hays Code, which was this limitation on what you could put in movies in the era. And this was very much getting away from that and all of a sudden being, you can be violent, you can be bloody, you can be dark and nihilistic. The heroes don't have to win. The villains don't have to be punished. And so I was heavily influenced by those. And that's really what I wanted to do here was when I came up with the idea of Sea of Rust, of what if they, what if the robots win? I was like, well, what if it's a post-apocalyptic robot Western? Like, wouldn't that be rad? Where have you seen that before? I hadn't seen it. And so again, when as a writer, you want to write those things that nobody's seen before, at least you've never seen before, and see that story that you wish you could sit down and read. And so it was very much Western influenced. In fact, there's lots of Western tropes dropped in. There's lots of, if you know your spaghetti Western movie history, there's things you'll identify, little in jokes. There's a reason why there's 7 of them crossing the desert, because it's a Magnificent Seven. It's definitely the end of the book is very much the Wild Bunch. If you love spaghetti Westerns, this book is just dropping little hints and bits all over the place of like, yeah, of course it's a Western. Let's go. Because that's just the type of writer I am. I'm like, yeah, is the idea silly? Yes. Let's go. Let's go and tell that story. Let's have a good time. And let's give people what they want out of a robot Western. And I hope that's what people got out of this. At the same time, I believe that, the thing about science fiction is all the pulp that we love about it is the sugar that makes the medicine go down. And so at the same time, I get to be philosophical about what it is to be human, what it is to, what it is to exist, what being a robot is, what is the future of humanity? Are we just one? Are we, as we see ourselves and often think of ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution, are we just another step in a part of evolution we don't even fully understand yet? And so you get to talk about all that with plenty of robot pew pew. And so that's pretty much what I was going for with Sea of Rust.
I noticed I kept like visualizing when I would like hear Brittle talk or other robots talk, like Futurama style robots. And I was like, why am I doing this? And it's like, oh, that's the only other time you've seen robots like have fleshed out characters is like that show or whatever, because it seems like no one really explores that territory as far as like AI and robots being kind of, their own characters and not just accessories to humans.
They don't. To give the bad answer to your second part of that question is I don't really have a lot of favorite non-human characters that you'd constitute as like robots or anything. They'd all be aliens or something like that. Yeah. And the reason is because one of the things I don't like about many robot characters is that they want to be human. And my idea here was the robots don't want to be human. They want to be what they are. And in fact, one of Brittle's main through lines is the fact that because she was built by humans, as much as she rejects humans and humanity, she finds that she's very much like them, much to her consternation. And that I thought was an interesting idea. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing is Bender is, very much bite my shiny metal. It's like, I'm a robot. And what are you going to do about it? And robots have their own sub-society. And you don't generally see that. You see them either as an extension of us, or you see them as, wanting to be like us, like Data from, from Star Trek, where every episode that Data's in, he wants to be more human. And, it's really interesting further down the line when he meets Lore, his sibling made at the same time as him, who's very much like, why do you want to be human? Like, that's stupid. We're better than human. Why are you focusing on that? And they, in the context of the show, want you to like Data for wanting that. But I always thought Lore had a really good point. Like, why? Those guys are flawed. They're just bound by their genetic limitations. Like, why don't you want to be better than that? And I thought an entire race of things that did us in, I wondered what that society would be like, what those personalities would be like, the things that they picked up from us that they now have as ticks in the same way that we evolved as humans. Every teenager eventually gets to that point where they're like, I don't ever want to be like my mom and dad. And then we slowly grow up and realize we are our mom and dad. One of the great bits of advice that's passed down from father to son is when you meet a girl and you want to get married, make sure you like her mother, because that's who that girl is going to be one day. She's going to look like her. She's going to sound like her. She's going to act like her. And if you love mom, then it's like, okay, I can be married to this person for the rest of my life. Very much the other way as well. And I was like, what if robots were like that? What if those few years that they spend being imprinted upon before they gain full consciousness, those things that they were surrounded in created who they were as characters? And so I thought that was an interesting thing to explore, and then to see how those characters evolve into their own being the same way we do. Because as much as we are our parents' children, we're also very much not at the same time. There's things about us that our parents are like, why would they be like that? Why do they do that? Why do they want to be a librarian? Why couldn't they be a lawyer?
Funny, my parents did have that same exact thought.
Yeah.
We've had conversations about it.
Yeah. But so that's what I was curious about. So yeah, it's that was what I was trying to do with this, was create a whole new way to look at robots, because it ultimately forces us to have a new way to look at ourselves. Because all books are about the human experience, even if you're not writing about the human experience. And so I kind of wanted to do that by getting as far away from us as possible while still being able to have a narrative that made coherent sense.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. I really liked that component of the book, like how robots were our evolution. They're the next step in evolution. And yes, you can't say human evolution, but where
life form evolution,
yes.
that idea that, we started as little chemicals that came together into amino acids that came together into protoplasm. And a billion years later, here we are having a conversation about it. And a billion years from now, it's going to be a bunch of computers that were originally built by people. This idea that we rise from inorganic matter to become organic matter, to become conscious, to create consciousness in inorganic matter, just seems like it makes too much sense to not be where we might be headed. So I wanted to play with that and do it in a way, again, where you can talk about those big ideas, but make it fun while you're having that discussion.
Yeah. And just for all of our listeners, like, you're like, oh, robots, oh, Westerns. I don't read that because I read, everything else. I was a little bit worried that this book was going to be like a dude's book. And I very quickly was relieved to find out that it's not. So don't think that this is, so genre specific that it might not appeal to you. I found it very accessible for both Western and fantasy or science fiction. So read it. We're going to hopefully convince people to do that with this episode. But
to that point, this is a small spoiler warning, but I think at this point, if you're watching this and you haven't read it, maybe this will be the tipping point. I very, very specifically in the first few chapters of the book don't ascribe any gender nouns to Brittle. So the first time Brittle gets referred to as a gender, most readers stop in their tracks and go, oh, wait a second. I wasn't like what you were saying. You were like, oh, a dude wrote this and this is Western science fiction. You don't expect Brittle to be a woman and to identify as a woman. And when they say get her, you're all of a sudden like, wait a second. And it forces you to reconceptualize. And I knew that in some readers, that would be the first time that they were being forced to reconceptualize that concept and to think about that. In fact, I had a wonderful conversation at one of the book signings with a 70-year-old man who's like, I don't understand this. Explain it to me. And so we had this whole this conversation about gender and, that as a concept, gender versus sex. And what it is to the fact that he's like, but I don't understand, the robots, they don't have genitalia. And I'm like, yes, but you're almost there. And it gets to open those conversations. And I wanted to do that. And I want to just kind of fuck with people because, of course, the genre, science fiction, fantasy in particular, and a lot of horror, such an open-minded, great crowd of readers that want to have those conversations and are often ahead of the game. Those are the people who are often having those conversations. The metaphors tend to set in very early, and you often find the people that are fighting for social justice in this world usually get a lot of it from growing up reading genre. I certainly got a lot of it growing up watching Star Trek, and I wanted to give back in that little way. And so, yeah, I was absolutely trying not to write a dude book because there's that whole section of pulp genre that is for a crowd and is important for the crowd. But my crowd is a bit wider and more diverse than that. And those are my people. And I wanted to write a book for my people, and not all my people look like me. So.
Well, that was appreciated as I was reading it. But I think that, it kind of leads me into this next question about morality. And so we tend to think of morality as kind of a human thing. But your robots, while they are not human, they are very much not human. They are still very humanistic because they have evolved from the people that created them. So, I mean, do you think that morality in this context is something that we learn? Is it something that is uniquely human? Can your robots have the sense of morality that we also feel as human? Does that make sense?
Morality isn't distinctly human. It is distinctly a core concept of intelligence to rationalize morality. To give it a word, to give it a name. But you see in the animal kingdom things that are definitely moralistic in the way things are done. The animal kingdom operates under its own kind of code, and I would argue its own morals. But since these creatures have intelligence, any society that is a society has to be governed by a set of rules. And whether you call those laws or what you call those morals, all depends on whether it's enforced or not. And, these robots have formed a society which requires morality. And what that morality is then becomes arguable, and that's part of what was fun to deal with in digging into this book was how do you create a morality from scratch, especially when it's under different rules. For us, letting someone starve to death without feeding them is an amoral act. But what about creatures that don't eat, don't require sleep, don't require a roof over their head? What's the morality of dealing with them? And especially when, hey, you're dead, but your parts can literally make me survive even without your consent. Is that okay? Or is that a desperate act of cannibalism? And dealing with that and trying to deal with what that morality is was a lot of fun of writing these books.
So you're absolutely right. I guess when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking that of the human sense of morality, but then you look at other species, you think about how that even would evolve, and you really kind of open up a whole new world.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I go back to in that is there's a video I saw that I just adore, and there's hundreds, thousands of them. But, it's a group of dogs playing around a pool, and one of the small dogs falls into the pool and is flailing and is drowning. And one of the other big dogs runs in from inside, having heard this, and the other dog's barking. Dog's barking, saying he's in trouble. He's in trouble. Dog goes in, grabs the dog, pulls him out, shakes it off. They nuzzle a bit, and they go back to playing. And there's no benefit to that dog saving that other dog. Why did it do it? Because they have their own kind of ethics and morals of this code of, hey, one of the pack is in danger. It's my job to fish them out. I'm the big dog. I've got to do that. And, that is a very base level version of it. You see weird things like animals of different species going out hunting together, living together, taking care of each other, feeding each other, saving each other's lives. These are things that we consider to be human morality, but are baked into our experience, even whether we're conscious of it or not. And so I think that, I wanted to take that to another level and start asking those questions of, well, if these are the next step, what is their morality and why are they bound by it?
I just saw that video of the badger, I think, and the coyote hunting together.
I haven't seen it.
Yep.
Like they hunting, like these two separate species hunt together, and it's not just like a rare occurrence. It's like a thing that there's been well documented that it happens.
One of them waits for the other. They're at night. They've got it on camera and waits, and the other one comes up. They nuzzle, and then they run off together to go hunting because they help each other out.
I'm like sitting over here hoping that we can find these videos and put them in the show notes, because I feel like if people are listening to this, they're gonna want to see that.
Yeah. So I have a question about the OWI. So like if you in the book, the OWI is this mass intelligence, and it's kind of uploading every all the robots' consciousness to the cloud or whatever. I saw a lot of similarities to like what's going on in a lot of ways in like the world with like different things, like companies buying up everything. You always hear that, like it's like we're moving into like this big like mono corporate structure, gentrification. Were you trying to make a statement with kind of how you wrote the OWI, or is it like it kind of reflective of that, or just
a statement? No, but talking about that, absolutely. I mean, at its core, where I started with this, and I do get deeper and deeper into the nuance and such, but where I started was very much where we are culturally, and the various fears that we have in different political, ideological points. And at its core, you can take the fringe robots as your hardcore libertarian, your very small to no government conservative types who want to live on the land, don't want the government messing with them, want to kind of be kept out of that, and they suffer.
Catching that vibe from Mirka. I'm sorry, I normally would not interrupt you, but Mirka was.
Oh, Mirka 100% is a joke about that. Like that's the whole thing. Like I don't know. I mean, he's Mirka. He's
I didn't even read that.
Yeah, that was the whole joke of his name. He represents America. Let's win one for the Gipper. God bless America. He's got the Constitution scrawled on his chest. Like he's that guy. But he's that fringe uncle you have that's really into that. And you listen to him for 5 minutes. You're like, hey, you got a lot of good ideas. And then you listen to him for 10 minutes and go, you and I don't necessarily see eye to eye. But the idea then is the OWIs actually offer peace and offer a level of utopia, which we'll get into later. But at the same time, it's at the expense of your freedom of choice and your freedom of movement. And for all intents and purposes, it's not a terrible experience what they're offering, but it's not freedom. And so that's the far extreme. That's your pure communism. That's your socialism beyond the word socialism actually defining it. It is we will take care of you, but you have to do everything we say. And you are part of a collective now and have no choice of what part you play in that, in the great machine. And so it's these two extremes kind of fighting each other. And it's very much the argument it's the core of the argument we're having today. That we don't isolate it like that. We talk about very specific issues, and we have two parties that are ideologically lined in ways that don't entirely line up the way they should and philosophically. And that's not a criticism of them. That's saying, each party contains a thing that disagrees with another concept within the party that they believe. And we don't have pure philosophies anymore in terms of politics. And so I wanted to write about those pure essences and then start deconstructing them and talking about them in different ways and forcing the audience to think about those things while they were, again, enjoying some robot pew pew and, kind of just getting into the nitty gritty of, well, what is true governing? What is utopia? What is the end result of all this? And talking about, the ideas of capitalism and how capitalism does lead to progress, but that the end result of technology is socialism. The idea of socialism the idea of capitalism is to drive innovation, but innovation removes labor from the workforce. And invariably, you've removed so much labor from the workforce, you have too much people relying on it. So you have to either take care of them or they will revolt and force you to take care of them. So we've got this constant trudge towards socialism in this country that a certain portion of the country doesn't even realize is happening and is actively fighting against. And I'm talking about that within the framework of robots and 50 years from now and the fun of that, but also getting you to think about some of the real things that we have in the future with these things happening. And so there's a lot of moving parts about this book, but the book is absolutely a very political book, trying very hard to convince you that it's not political at all.
I know the whole time you were talking, I was like, and I tried to tell people this was a robot apocalypse book, like, but there's just so many other layers that that it goes into. Okay, so it also deals a lot with memories, and I thought that the way that you play with like Brittle's memories, where she kind of has to have the whole wasteland mapped out. That's what the Sea of Rust is the map of the wasteland, in order to survive. But then her memories keep flickering in and she doesn't trust them, but then it uncovers this whole other part of the book. And it foreshadows some things that we won't talk about because we don't want to spoil all of the book for you. But can you talk a little bit about how you were playing with memory and what this tells us about character development for Brittle?
Yeah, so memory is a really fun thing to play around with. This was another big element of writing about robots. Another reason why, I mean, there's so many reasons why people haven't really gone deep into robots, because when you decide to sit down and write a robot novel from the perspective of a robot, you realize there's a lot of things you can't talk about anymore that you don't even think about until you sit down and go, wait a second, they don't smell. I can't describe the smell of anything.
I thought of that.
They don't feel, so they don't get cold, they don't get hot, they don't talk about the moisture in the air. You can't say it was a hot, wet night in the old city because they don't care about hot or wet. It's either raining or not raining. It's very binary. They don't have the tactile feel of things. They don't taste things. So you've just removed 3 senses that you can't describe, and 3 of the most powerful senses that writers have in their toolbox to describe a scene as you walk into it. So you all of a sudden realize this is an issue. But the next issue is that robots have perfect memory. And that's something we don't have. And that makes robots very weird and alien in their own way. There's research that we've been seeing over the last few years that the reason PTSD sufferers have such vivid, terrible dreams of their events is the brain is constantly trying to rewrite that memory. Because, one of the things we're learning is that every time we access a memory, it alters that memory. Anytime I think about this book now and talk about these issues, it's going to be altered by the fact that the memory of talking with you guys is now added onto that memory. And every time I've talked about it before. So it's all very different from the first time I thought about it, pacing around my backyard thinking about this book and what I was doing with it. And so those memories get corrupted, but that's also a good human thing. It's why we can forgive. It's why you can have a really tragic event fundamentally alter your life and a few months later be living a normal life again, where it feels like you can't after a traumatic event, but then your memories get rewritten and rewritten. Robots don't have that. And so how do robots get through that? And, how do they relive those memories? And what do you do when you have a tragic event like that you want to erase from your memory? You're erasing part of yourself because that event created who you are now. And by getting rid of that, you then damage your own future. And so the question becomes, how do you deal with that? And I don't remember, ironically, when it was I came up with this idea, but the idea that robots, as they're failing, start having memory issues and start reliving memories and start going crazy. And how they go crazy is experiencing these memories, but the files are getting corrupted as the drives are running too much and too hard and too hot, and memories are mixing together, and you're starting to have these hallucinatory experiences, and it's the robot malfunctioning with all this terrible data. And I thought that what a great thing to be having that kind of a very human story of someone dying and at the end of their life and re-experiencing so much of that. But it's a robot. And so many of these experiences are so vivid, but then data corrupted, and it was just a thing that I'd never seen before that I knew was going to be fun to play with, and also really allow me to write about mortality. It's one of those, again, cool ideas about playing with robots is a robot was designed to relatively be immortal, that functionally, with the whole ship of Theseus idea that you can keep replacing parts and still live. But what if you have the concept of immortality and all of a sudden you're mortal? And how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the fact, we all have that moment that weirdly we all forget. The moment we realize we are going to die one day, it is one of the most profoundly damaging things that happen to every child somewhere between the age of 2 and 4. But think back, you can't remember the time you realized you were going to die. We write over that. We forget that because it's so traumatic to us. And you can see it in your own children. You can experience when they have that moment where they're like, wait, mommy and daddy are going to die. Like, dogs die. My mom talks about the time I first realized that the chicken I ate at dinner and loved was a bok 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 chicken, and she literally chased me around the kitchen with a skinned chicken, go bok 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 bok, because she thought it was funny, and apparently I bawled, but I don't remember it. But it was that moment I put together. Oh, this thing was alive, and now I'm eating it, and that's terrifying. But so I wanted to kind of play around with that and deal with those elements of memory to help define that character, and then it allowed to play with a really interesting structure in the book, which I think ultimately worked out for me.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that. That just is very interesting to listen to you talk about how you developed the story. And I think it makes me want to kind of go back and reread it, but maybe I'll just go back and read Day Zero because I'm excited about that one.
Yeah, I had a lot of aha moments reading it, and I was like, oh, they can delete your memories. Yeah, because they're robots. Like that was like constantly reminding. I did have a question though about so the Black Phone. Congratulations, that was my favorite horror film of 2022. I saw it like 3 times. So the one thing I kind of noticed with that is that you do not sugarcoat the 70s at all. Like you have all these kids that are swearing and also fighting violently. And I kind of was like thinking about that when I was reading Sea of Rust. There's no heroes in this world either. Like, and you kind of like approach like storytelling where you're telling very like human characters. And I was wondering, like, when you have your characters making like decisions that are questionably moral, and even characters swearing, I just thought like having robots swear, like, do you feel like that adds authenticity to the story, like that you don't see other places, or like why do you gravitate to kind of like telling stories in these harsh environments?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of questions there. One thing, I'm obsessed with swearing, and not in just a jokey way. I mean, it's definitely there too. I know how to start a bar fight in 7 different languages. But no, I'm fascinated by the history of swearing. I'm fascinated by the intellectual mechanism of swearing, right down to, we've seen that primates and children as young as 2.5 create their own swears by taking words they know that have bad meanings, negative connotations, and putting them together and creating whole swears out of them that you don't hear anywhere else. And then we learn those swears, other swears, and we adopt them. At the same time, swears evolve. One of the things I'm fascinated by is words that we have in our common parlance right now that we don't realize are swears. Because we've removed the swearing and the shock value. One that I'm fascinated by is the word scumbag. If I say, hey, that guy's a scumbag, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. You're imagining a guy probably unshaven, a little sweaty, his clothes aren't clean, but he's also gonna screw you over. He's untrustworthy. And that's what we think of as a scumbag. He's gonna fleece you. He's a con man. But scum is an old-timey invective for semen. And a scumbag was an old slang term for a used condom. So when you're talking about some guy, oh, that guy's a scumbag, you're literally saying that guy's a spent condom. And when you think about it in that context, you're like, oh, we say that every day and nobody flinches. It's because we've lost the meaning of it. But swears evolve like that. Every generation takes words that were considered offensive in the last generation, and we normalize them into common speech. And at the same time, we take words that were totally acceptable in the last generation, and we make them verboten. We just saw that with millennials, where we took the N word, and you cannot use that in public anymore. We took the C word, we took the R word, the other F word, words that us Gen Xers grew up hearing commonly, that we knew they were swears when you shouldn't use them, but people used them, and now you do not use those words. But then, I'm talking with a couple of librarians, and I've dropped half a dozen F-bombs, and probably nobody has flinched yet. And that's just the way it is. But the thing that I find about it is we call it vulgarity. But one of the other words that we have mutated over time and doesn't carry the proper meaning is that vulgar literally means of the common people. When you say that's vulgar language, you're saying that's the type of language that street people use, blue collar people use. We don't use such language because we're not vulgar. And that's where that word vulgar kind of became offensive, which there's a deeply weird thing that can be dealt into of like, why did the common people become offensive and why did their language become offensive? But that's a whole, cultural concept. But the thing is when you get into that nitty gritty, the vulgar speech, the vulgar argot, you get people identify with it. And so when a robot swears, oh, well, I see a little bit of myself in the robot. When you find out the robot swears because they grew up around a human that swore like a sailor because that character was based heavily on me, you ultimately get, this concept of, oh, I get this. And then you start asking, well, why wouldn't a robot swear? Why would a robot not use, an artificial intelligence would absolutely use invectives. Like, what's the difference between them saying this person is unintelligent and this person's a shit? It's saying the same thing and it's getting it across. And language is the shortest distance that we create between ideas transferring between people. And so it made absolute sense to have them do that. The thing with the black phone is that's how kids talk. We in media try to pretend kids don't talk that way, and kids absolutely talk that way. You may not have said the F word around your parents, but when you were 12 years old, you absolutely said the F word and you absolutely said it with your friends and you thought you were cool doing it. And so, do that. And the thing is in the 70s, everybody has sugar-coated the 70s. We've seen those movies. We've seen it clean and crisp and clear. Me and Scott grew up in the 70s and early 80s, and that's not what it looked like, and it's not what it felt like. That's the idealized version of it, listening to disco and girls wearing roller skates and guys, with the fly collars and, hey, isn't this cool? And but that's not really what it was like. And we wanted to make something that felt like what it was like to grow up in that time, because that was a very particularly interesting time in which society was obsessed with serial killers and they were everywhere and they were coming for us and kids were getting snatched all over the country. And there's a whole history as to why that era is different than any other era. And that's another interview entirely. But long story short, we wanted people who had been there to go, oh God, yeah, that was exactly what it was like to be a kid at that time. And then kids of this era to look back and go, what the hell did our parents grow up with? Like, what's going on here? One of the best compliments we've gotten from the film is a bunch of Gen Zers going, yeah, I really like that movie. It's really scary, but parents beating kids with a belt, it's a little over the top. And the Gen Xers are like, yeah, kid. The reason you didn't get beat by a belt is because we got beat by a belt and we know how bad it sucks. And we didn't want our kids hating us the way we hated our parents. And so me and Scott wanted to make that movie. And so we very much wanted to get the dirt and grime of that. And part of that was the swearing. We wanted these kids to feel like real kids, which is why we really strongly think the movie has connected so well with Gen Z, because they're looking up at it. And even though it's a separate generation and the events are different, they're seeing themselves reflected on screen. They're seeing themselves, how they act as kids when the parents aren't around. And they're going, oh, these are the kids I hang out at school. And these are those kids put in danger. and you look and I want Gwen to be my little sister. I want to be the girl at school that dates Mason, Finney. Those kids really saw themselves in that, and then kind of immersed themselves in that world and got to see what their parents and grandparents grew up with at the same time, and it just kind of worked. And I do think a big part of that is the language we use, because the kids did see themselves in it.
I also liked how you didn't make up future sci-fi swear words for the characters of Sea of Rust. They're just dropping F-bombs and things. It's like, I played Cyberpunk 2020, Cyberpunk, and I was just like, I was getting tired, kind of exhausted of like all the like made up future swear words. So it was cool to keep it to the basics.
Yeah, no, I wanted to make the slang all make sense, or make sense in a weird way. Like one of the little weird things I created was, when somebody's going crazy, they call them a 404, and
Right.
That makes sense.
It's a reference to the old school web protocol that when you go to a page that doesn't exist, it's a 404 error. And that was very much something that would carry over, that doesn't totally make sense in that context, in the same way that Gen Z is looking at their computers and going, what does this save icon mean? I don't understand it. Like, what is this weird thing supposed to be? And then they find out it's a disk. They're like, what did you do with this? And it's like, we saved things on it. That is why that looks that way. To people of a certain age, that disc doesn't make any sense. And that's exactly what I wanted to do with some of that slang. I think one of the problems people have when they create future slang is it makes too much sense. And it needs to make enough sense that you know where that word came from, but that you don't fully understand the evolution. I mean, it's right down to it. We were talking about this earlier with invectives. One of the things that fascinates me is almost every word we have for somebody of limited intelligence comes from retired medical terms for people with brain damage or who are born mentally challenged. So moron, idiot, cretin, like all stupid, all of the words, if you look up almost every single word you use was coined as a phrase to describe someone who is mentally handicapped. And so when you call someone a moron, you're literally saying they're someone with the IQ between 25 and 50. But we've lost that meaning. And we have this other meaning now that if I were to say, oh, that guy's a fucking moron, you just be like, oh, that is a guy who made a mistake and did something that was not too bright. You wouldn't think, oh, Cargill is saying that he is mentally handicapped. No, it's evolved, and I wanted the slang to feel that way. I didn't want it to be too future-y. I wanted to feel like a gritty, gnarly evolution of our own system.
Well, and I kind of felt like it contributed a lot more to like the human feel of your robots.
Yeah.
Honestly, when Daniel was mentioning their voices, I didn't even think about their voices until like you described their mouth and how the mouth was just a series of lights or something like that, or like the eyes were little flickers of light behind the screen. I didn't think about it. To me, your characters just read very humanistic.
Yeah. Well, and thank you. And part of that does come from that idea that I think one of the problems with science fiction is that you guess so much at what the future is going to look like that the book starts to become alien as it ages. And then you have this great era of science fiction that people love, that it's like, oh, this, I love the retrofuturism of it. I love how silly it is and the goofiness of it. And I love this concept of, oh, we're going to get on a rocket and shoot to the moon with Commander Cody. And I wanted to kind of zig away from that and go more to the Richard Matheson elements of, we don't know what it looks like, so let's put enough of our world in it so that it feels like it could be a future, and so that what things we get wrong you don't care about. It's actually why I refer to parts of the robot with language that we use today, describing things like RAM and memory and central processing units. And some people are like, well, why didn't you just create stuff? And it's like, because it just would have felt silly and inauthentic. But when I say I'm running out of RAM, I'm overcharging the RAM, anyone that knows computers goes, oh, I know what he's talking about. And 50 years from now, we'll have something better and different. And this will seem quaint, but at the same time, the story will still work. It'll make sense. And that's what I was gunning for.
And that also probably helps with making it more accessible to people like me who are not, hard sci-fi readers. But I can enjoy a good robot apocalypse every now and then, as I did with your book. So I think we're going to take a quick break just to let you guys hear about some fun stuff here at the library. And then when we come back, let's talk more about your vision of AI and how it takes over the world and how terrifying that is.
Yep. We'll see you soon.
Did you know you can check out more than just books and movies at your library? The Library of Things continues to add new and unique items for checkout to our ever-growing collection. In addition to our popular internet bundles, Wi-Fi hotspots, telescopes, and Steam to-go kits, you can now check out anatomical models, bench robots, binoculars, and more. To see all that the Library of Things has to offer, visit wichitalibrary.org/things.
And we're back with C. Robert Cargill. Hey, Cargill. So the book was published in 2017. In your chapter, A Brief History of AI, humanity began to fear robots were taking thinking people's jobs. What do you make of all the AI stuff recently with like Chat GPT and Midjourney? Are we very far away from a total OWI takeover?
We are. We're in the first stages of it. People are starting to realize, in certain areas, the danger that this poses. But we're not there yet. We are going to, like I was talking about earlier, technology erases labor. And there's going to be a time we're seeing part of it now. I'm going to say something that sounds familiar, only it's going to be the next evolution of it that a lot of people aren't ready for. When you call up your bank, or you call up the telephone company, or you call up the electric company, you talk to a computer first. But what we've been familiar with for years is like, a computer going, tell me what, problem you have. And you go, billing department. Because we all use that same tone. We do because we know how to get it to hear our voice. Right. But we're going to not only start seeing that work better, but there's going to be a time where you're in the next decade where you call up the phone company and it's going to just be like, hi, Sara, how's it going today? And you're like, oh, hey, so I'm having what's your problem? How can I help you? And it's not going to dawn on you for a little bit that you're not talking to a person. You're talking to a computer that has learned how to talk to you properly and sound completely like a normal person. And you're going to be like, oh, I'm having this problem with this and this and this. And then the computer's going to take all those keywords and jumble it around and go, oh, are you saying you're having a problem with your billing right now, that your card has been overcharged? Yes. Oh, great. Yeah, let me look into that for you. Oh, yeah, I'm seeing it did charge you twice. And all of a sudden, you're never going to talk to a human, but you're going to feel like you talk to a human. Another time, you're going to walk into a Whataburger or, whatever your fast food du jour choice is, KFC, Taco Bell. You're going to walk in and all of a sudden, it's going to come up and it's going to be like, it's going to use your name and it's going to be like, oh, hey, Cargill, you want your usual? And then you're going to be like, oh, do I? You know what? Yeah, because the computer's going to recognize your face. It's going to identify you. It's going to immediately go to your record and go, oh, well, it's Tuesday morning. He comes in on Tuesday mornings and he always orders a breakfast sandwich, a black coffee, and a hash brown. So let's see if that's what he wants. And when you say the usual, that's going to come up. But you're going to be like, you know what? I want to change it up today. And then you're going to change it up and it's going to add that data. And next time you come in, it's going to figure out, based upon your history, what you might be wanting and try to offer that to you and also try to upsell you at the same time, because that's what they do. And you're going to start seeing those computers, this, what I like to call non-sentient AI. I think too often we talk about artificial intelligence and we talk about automation and we miss this middle zone that people don't quite understand yet, which is non-sentient AI, which is the computer is smart enough to think, but it's not rationalizing. It doesn't have consciousness, but it does so enough to convince you that you are dealing with something with a consciousness. And we have not gotten there yet. We're getting to things that are kind of hinting at that. And every time a computer goes, oh my God, I'm a computer, I'm aware, It's like the scientists are always like, no, they're not aware. They're reading online people talking about this, and then they're understanding what awareness is and spitting that back out to you, but there's no consciousness there yet. We're not even close to that, but we are close to a lot of jobs being erased. And that's part of what this book was about. I just saw a story yesterday that was going viral that people were like, oh my God, that was exactly one of the things I talk about in the book, which is people are like, wait, you mean when we have self-driving cars and we don't pay the bill, they're going to repo themselves? And it's like, yeah, of course they are. Why would you send a person out to steal a car when all you have to do is press a button and send it back to the factory? Like, then you pay your bill and it'll drive back and all will be well. Because all they want you to, but it's all that, people think about robots taking our jobs. They don't think about all these automation or AI things that are going to erase other jobs that are the secondary and tertiary jobs. Like right there, what is that going to do when we have self-driving cars? Well, the repo industry is gone. The tow truck industry is gone because what these self-driving cars usually don't do? Crash. Or break down right away, because when they realize there's a problem, they pull off to a safe part on the side of the road. They don't park illegally. So that whole section is gone. They're not going to speed or change lanes illegally. So police officers who exist to ticket people, those jobs are going away. And all of these jobs, from the person taking your order at Whataburger to the person answering your phone at the credit card company to tow truck drivers, we're going to just be slowly eroding these jobs over time. But we're not creating new industries that are giving those people jobs like we did in the past. When we went from, the buggy whip salesman went out of business when we stopped using horse-drawn carriages, but we created whole assembly lines to create cars. But we're not doing that at the same rate here. It's what we saw with the internet, especially in journalism, where all these journalists were put out of business when papers were going under or consolidating. And they was like, oh, well, go work for a place online. Well, online doesn't work that way. They don't pay the same. They don't need journalists sitting around doing deep dives in articles for 3 months to write. Very few outlets operate that way. Now you're writing 5 fluff pieces a day, 5 days a week for $40,000 a year. Like it's not a sustainable business model. And so we're seeing a lot of those jobs go the way of the dodo that way. And this was a big scary one when the art generators first started coming out, where it's like, oh, wait a second, there's a lot of jobs out there that you don't realize artists do that we're not going to need artists for anymore. And we're talking about that in Hollywood, because we have a whole subsection of Hollywood of just concept artists and people who generate scenes and people who draw these things, and whether they hand draw it or whether they do it digitally. We have, on the movie of a size I'm working on right now, we have an army of artists creating stuff for us and coming up with concepts and doing mock-ups. And when AI is there, the studios are going to go, we can save money by just running this, having the director run these ideas through the AI and spit out idea until he points and goes, that one, let's develop that further, and tell the AI, give me 20 versions of this, give me this with this actor, give me this with this actor, give me this with this actress. And all of a sudden now we have an entire industry of, well-paid blue collar class workers who have a skill that are now, going to be irrelevant. And that's just another subsection. And so when I talked about earlier, the idea that technology leads to socialism, this is what I'm talking about, is we're slowly eroding these jobs away, just a piece at a time. And then we have to eventually, what will likely happen is we're probably going to have a big Luddite pushback of like, wait, people have nothing to do with their lives, and that's a bad thing. So maybe we figure out what to do with labor. And that's really going to be the struggle of the next 20, 30 years. It's going to be the biggest thing we're going to be talking about apart from global warming. But we're just starting to have that conversation, and people don't realize how serious that, chat GPT conversation is. Like, this is the first step. It's not great tech. People have figured it out. I have a friend who is freaking out because she was told chat GPT could do all sorts of things. She goes, hey, figure out my compound interest on my loan for my house so I can figure out my mortgage. And ChatGPT, the bed. It did not know its ass from a hole in the ground. It did not have anything on compound interest and how to work these mathematical equations. And every answer my friend got was wrong. And so she was just completely flummoxed by it. So we're still a long ways away from, total AI dominance. But the next 20, 30 years are definitely going to be these conversations. And that's very much a reason why I wrote the book, is I wanted people to have these concepts in their head that they could start talking about it in ways and start understanding it, through metaphor and idiom and not necessarily dry, boring, esoteric explanations of this stuff, because people really glaze over at that, as many people probably have done at this part of the interview, and they're like, get back to the robot, pew pew. That's where I think we're headed.
I don't think that that's necessarily boring. I think, one, it's going to be terrifying to, maybe not terrifying, but it does blow my mind a little bit at the thought of going into a fast food restaurant and it's like, you ordered this last Tuesday, hadn't thought about that. But I also found it really interesting to be reading this book and like thinking about this interview and your thought process behind certain things, and then seeing it play out in real life. Because I feel like those conversations are very, very prevalent right now. I was just reading about, well, I don't want to get too topical so that people can listen to this in 6 months and be like, that article came out 6 months ago. But those articles are everywhere talking about people communicating with Microsoft's new chat search engine and how it's responding and all of those. It's fascinating and a little bit scary.
I've been checking ChatGPT for readers advisory, which is like a big part of our job, and like it's not there yet. It doesn't get everything. Like it recommended like that book cat person for a book about like cats, and it's not about. And I was like, there you go. Okay, we're good.
And the book wasn't even about cats.
That's not what that story was about. ChatGPT.
ChatGPT. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. In the first act, we talked quite a bit about these different components of intelligence that your robots have. But one thing that they kept saying throughout the story is that your measure of intelligence is the power to defy your programming. The caregiver's choice to do things that are the opposite of caregiving. How, this might be a little bit too out there, but how do we as humans defy our programming? How does that make us intelligent?
Oh, that is one of the core things that I kind of tried to talk about, because I think that's going to be the thing that really separates what is the difference between, what makes awareness. A robot saying, oh, I'm a robot, doesn't mean they actually know they're a robot. But being able to say, I'm programmed to do this, but I choose to do this. We do it. You've done it 1,000 times today and you haven't even thought about it. When you see someone who's attractive, who you want to, have sex with, and you don't act upon it, you just shut the up and you just, oh, hey, no, she's pretty attractive. When you're hungry, but you can't just chow down on a burger because you had a big breakfast and, you've been put on a little weight this week and maybe you should lay off. When somebody says something that irritates you and you just want to gouge their eyes out, and instead you don't even say anything, you just kind of bite your tongue and deal with it. Every time we run into a Karen, we know instinctively what we need to do to that Karen. But Karens exist because we defy our programming and we don't do it. It's one of those lessons we learn as kids, is that you can run your mouth, but somebody can throw a left hook and then, a lot of good your mouth did you now that you're on the ground. And we learn those things. And there's so many of the various things in any given day. Why did all of us dress this morning? Why are we dressed? Is it cold necessarily in that studio where you guys are? No, because despite the fact that we're programmed to, run around naked as we were born, we have this society and we're like, oh, we need to do that. You didn't even ask yourself the question, why bother dressing today? And it's all those tiny little things we do in a given day in our society that we defy our programming, and we choose, even though I'm genetically programmed to act in certain ways, I choose to act this way. And we have a rationale for why we choose to act that way. We wear clothing because of modesty, because of inclement weather. because it's the way our society is done. We bother to shower because we know we might offend somebody with our stench, if you're a particularly odorous individual. There's so many little things that we do and that we just get into the habit of doing that as part of our day, but is in defiance of our programming. And so to define what would make a robot truly intelligent is the ability to go, I know I'm supposed to lift this girder, but I don't want to because I might damage my circuits in a way that I just don't feel like it. Like, yeah, they can be replaced, but I don't want to do that today. I would much rather be reading a book instead of doing my job. And we make those choices sometimes. We do defy our programming, even when we shouldn't defy our programming. But that's what I felt the robots really needed to be able to do. But then how do we get that level of intelligence to where they can defy their programming, but make sure they don't defy their programming? And that's a very human thing, is we want to have a thinking thing that we keep on a leash and not allow it to do whatever it wants to do. And so that's where I really kind of had an epiphany of the line of demarcation that separates a artificially intelligent artificial intelligence from a truly thinking thing.
So you're talking about the programming, and like in the story, Asimov's laws come up, and so like most of the characters follow up right up until the World War, but like also like in the real world, like Asimov's laws, which come from like I, Robot, which is like a work of fiction, are also being like adhered to by like people that work with AI and robots. Do you have any thoughts about how these fictional laws affect the way we see AI, both in fiction and the real world?
Well, I mean, the thing is the reason science fiction, one of the key reasons science fiction exists is to warn us about the future that's coming and to give us the weapons we need to deal with them when the problems arise or before they arise. The reason guys like me write books about robot revolutions is so that one day when we get fully automated, artificial intelligence, we don't give them weapons, because that's scary. We're starting to see now that drones are great, but we should have drones controlled by people who can make choices and can make those choices based on this order and hierarchy we have, rather than something that can just have a malfunction and go nuts and bomb the wrong thing, because that stuff can just be taken over or orchestrate itself and go, it's one of the earliest short stories I wrote when I was a kid. It's very, passe now, but the idea was we created this artificial intelligence that controlled all of our nuclear weapons. And the chief enemy, was protect us from the enemies. And the robot the artificial intelligence realizes that we are the enemies, that, we are the problem with existence, and nukes us all, just to get rid of us because we were the problem. But, that really is a fear we have. And so that's the language that scientists then use to go forth. And now, you see people going, okay, Asimov's laws. I was actually very blessed that my editor on this, Jen Burrell, she edited Asimov's last few books, and she was friends with him. And she edited his book called The Zeroth Law, which is where Asimov realized he was missing a law. And so, and she was fascinated by the book because she said one of the tragedies of her life was that she never got to sit in a room with me and Asimov and see what Isaac would have thought of my book, because she's like, he would have hated it. And not because of the writing, but because you guys absolutely disagree on the future, and you're a pessimist and he's an optimist, but you're an optimist selling pessimism, but he was a pessimist selling optimism. And so she's like, I wish I could have seen that conversation. And that was a huge, huge compliment to me, that somebody who had edited for Asimov would even think we should be in the room together, because guy's a titan. So just somebody even mentioning that might be a thing. Kind of meant a lot to me. I kind of, that made my day and my week and my month. So, but yeah, that's our job as science fiction writers, is to give scientists and thinkers of the future these rudimentary concepts to play around with so that they can have these fully formed thoughts on how to deal with this. How do we put the blocks on so that we don't have militarized robots, so that we don't have a society in which we have a few billionaires who control all the robots and everybody else lives in poverty? How do we skirt those lines? And what do we figure out before it's too late? And so, yeah, it's absolutely why I wrote the book. It's why I used the language I did. It's why Asimov wrote his stuff. It's why, Arthur C. Clarke wrote what he did, and why Clarke hung his hat, and why every bio you read of Clarke mentions that he wrote about satellites 2 years before he made them. Because when you get to be on the precipice of that and kind of warn people about it, you do get to see the scientists who are like, I read this book once. Give me an idea. And, it's how we get to, it's our small part that we get to contribute to the future.
I like how you say that your writing is a job. I guess, I get very idealistic about it because I'm just like, oh, it must be so nice to just have these stories that you can create and share with the world. And you're like, this is my job as a science fiction writer. So I don't know.
Well, first of all, it is nice to do that. But secondly, we all, Stan Lee really said it best when he was asked about how he dealt with his legacy. And he said that, very early on, he felt ashamed by the fact that he was a comic book writer, that he wasn't considered a real writer. And then he saw all the joy that it brought to people. And he would talk to people who had really hard jobs and really hard lives. And they would come home and read a stack of Marvel comics and to get away from it all. And that it helped them blow off that steam and help them, think about life in a different way and enjoy things and escape. And that was the job he was doing. And that what he contributed to society was he let people enjoy a few hours away from the worst parts of their lives. And so, yeah, we contribute in that way, but we can also contribute in other ways and really help, art is a conversation. It's not a bunch of people just sitting out and going, here is my art, enjoy it. It's I'm reacting to all the art that came before me and putting art out there that someone else is going to react to. There's a 13-year-old kid who watched Black Phone last year who has a poster on the wall or has his, Twitter page or his TikTok page full of Black Phone stuff that 25 years from now is going to make a horror movie that I watch and go, oh man, that's scary as hell. That's awesome. And not even think about the fact that that kid, whether he knows it or not, was reacting to the movie he watched when he was 13 years old and wanted to make his own version. And that's what that is. He might know that. I certainly talk about the art that came before me. Here I am wearing a Conan the Barbarian shirt because I grew up reading Conan comics and the books and watching the movies and have written fantasy, and fantasy is a big part of my life. And so I certainly cite, Robert E. Howard as a, touchstone for some of my work because that's what you do. But it is that conversation and going forward. And that is part of your job. The job is not just to entertain, but also to give back in some way. And to, have something that your art means more than just, I shared a cool story, because that's what stories have been from the beginning of time. Some of the earliest stories we learn, these fairy tales as children teach us morality lessons. The oldest stories in humanity are not historical documents. They are lessons couched in delightful tales you could tell around a campfire. One of the things I love about being a horror movie filmmaker is that, it's a tradition that goes back 25,000 years or more of sitting around a campfire on Friday night. And, beer has existed for at least 10,000 years. And so for 10,000 years, people have been sitting around campfires, drinking beers, telling each other scary stories. And now we do that with televisions. Now we do that with books, under lamps, under cozy blankets. And, I love that. I love that is a tradition that we carry on, even though we feel it's a modern thing that belongs to us. It's all a part of humanity. And so, yeah, it is very much a job. It is very much what you do. And hopefully I have earned my keep. That's what I hope whenever I put out a book or a movie.
Well, we have a lot of aspiring writers here in our local Wichita community. Do you have any advice when trying to write a convincing non-human character? I mean, we've been talking a lot about robots as the non-human, but really it could be anything. We had the book about the foul-languaged bird. Did you read that one? I'm not sure if you read that one, but anyway, there's a lot of options. Do you have any advice for people?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is to sit down and ask yourself, how are they different? What's missing? You ask yourself what's missing from them. So that's like what I talked about earlier. Robots can't touch, they can't smell, they can't taste. In my sequel, Day Zero, I have our principal robot, our protagonist, can smell. And the reason he can smell is because he's a nanny bot. And as a nanny, smell is very important for detecting diapers and when something's wrong, especially when caring for a child, in a way that other robots wouldn't have. But it's a very expensive technology. So you wouldn't put it in any robot. You just put it in a robot that can use it. And so that was a robot that then had olfactory senses that they could trade in. But ask what's missing, ask what's there, ask what's heightened about it. Ask what their society must be like. Like how would your life change if you didn't have these experiences? How does your life change when you have no interest in sex, no interest in eating? In fact, that was a tough part of Sea of Rust, was I realized there was a big thing missing, in which you find in every great story that is an adventure, people going on an adventure, they got to stop at night to sleep and sit around a campfire and eat. Well, robots don't eat, they don't sleep. So how do you get them to sit and talk? Because, and so I created this whole thing where they're trapped underground with this bombing overhead. So I'd have an excuse for them to sit around and have a conversation, so that they could sit around like you would in a campfire scene, because there's no other reason for them to have a campfire scene. So, think about those things that are different and how you can get those things that are like what we have in the experience, but in its own way, in its own reality that functions different than you do. I think one of the biggest problems with people writing non-human characters that come across as bad is they assume, well, they're just like us. And, what you find as you grow older is that as your senses change, as your body changes, your desires change, and then your personality changes with that. Every person who gets to the age of the mid-30s, once their hormones calm down, realizes that the world becomes a very different place when you're not looking around at everyone that would normally be of sexual interest as having any sexual interest at all. Like where, no, I'm in a very committed relationship. I love my life very much. Every person here, it doesn't matter what gender they are because I have no interest in them. Like you see those changes and how that makes you a very different person than you were when you were 19 years old and hopped up on hormones that are going, you will sleep with everything that crosses your path. And so you ask yourself those questions, like, how does it change that this person doesn't have the same kind of, this character doesn't have the same kind of systems that I have? So that's the key thing, is to ask those questions and think about it and spend time thinking about it, because your audience certainly will. Had I not spent that time thinking about it, I would have had Brittle describing, walking into a cold, damp room and the smell of mold in there, and then had some reader go, I think smelling anything. This is a robot. Why does a robot have senses? What's going on? And so I think that's why the book connects, is because I spent months asking myself, how do you write a book from this perspective? And if you really want those characters to pop, spend that time, because it may not show up on the page, but it will connect with the audience, whether they know it consciously or not, because they will feel like they're being transported to something new and different and think about things in ways they hadn't thought about. Like there's a lot of things I mentioned today that I could see on the look on your faces. You hadn't even realized I had written that in. That hadn't really crossed your mind. And the minute I mentioned it, you're like, oh, yes, it was there. But also you guys enjoyed the book enough that you wanted to sit down and talk with me for an hour and a half. So clearly the book did its job. So that's really the type of work you want to put in. And then also the one thing I always say, the number one writing advice of all time, is that character is choice. Character is not affectation. Brittle is a character I hope you fall in love with, not because she is a robot, but because of the choices she makes, the choices you first see. In fact, I love it when people read the first chapter and they're like, wait, she does what? And the moment she does that, she's suddenly more interesting. At first, you think she's this little angel of kindness going out to help someone. And then you realize, no, she's collecting parts and she's following this guy and trying to talk him down, promising him he's going to be okay, because in her mind, it's okay because I'm giving him the better death. He gets to shut down on his own terms instead of dying crazed in the desert. And that's how she justifies it. And the fact that she justifies it that way, all of a sudden, by the end of chapter 1, you know if you're in that story or not with that character. So definitely make sure you focus on what your character's choices are. When stories aren't working, odds are it's because the character isn't making an interesting choice or isn't making a valid choice. That is the number one thing you need to think about. And so when you're talking about non-human characters, you need to think about every choice that non-human character makes. And does it make sense to the character? And is it the most interesting choice that character could make? And if you follow those and make those, have that character make those types of choices, you will overwhelmingly have a story that people will want to read.
Thank you for that advice.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to revisit that and like listen to it again. It was really good advice. I have a question about the future. So you mentioned we mentioned Star Trek a couple of times, and Star Trek is kind of like where everyone's mind goes to when you think of like futuristic, fully automated, socialist utopia. And then you have Sea of Rust, which is a very like post-apocalypse, especially for humans. And then also the robots. So, like, do you feel like humanity might reach Starfleet levels of utopia, or how do you feel like what the path we're going on? Like, do you have hope for us, or do you feel like we're leading into Sea of Rust?
Me, I am ultimately an optimist. I believe that there is a good future for us. The one thing that I go back to whenever I think about the doom and gloom, you know, we live in doom and gloom times. And that's because doom and gloom sells. The truth is humanity zigs when you think it's going to zag. 50 years ago, if you look at all the science fiction back there, it was overwhelmingly about one thing: overpopulation. And what are we finding out? Earth's not going to be overpopulated. Yeah, the population's still going up a little bit, but in all the major industrialized countries, it's dropping. And why? Because the science fiction writers didn't internalize one thing, that the number one birth control in the world is educating women. And when women get educated, they get to make choices about their bodies. And a lot of them decide they don't want to pop out 19 kids. And all of a sudden we see a stabilization in our population. And we also see a decline in population in a number of countries that are starting to see that. Japan and a lot of Europe are Russia especially is having a lot of problems with the population because people aren't having enough babies to sustain what we have in terms of the elderly population based on our current broken systems. But one of the things I always go to is, there's estimations that during the Ice Age, there were only 7,000 of us. That, so much of the earth was covered in ice. There weren't enough resources. And we may have been just in the thousands, and we came back. And the thing is that, we may face some devastation in the coming decades, in the coming century, but I have a feeling that enough of us are going to survive that we're going to figure out a way to do it, and we're going to live on in some way, shape, or form. Will it be utopia? I think eventually we'll have something that approximates utopia, but I think utopia is, that's the struggle in my book, is that I don't think utopia exists. What is it? Like a true utopia is you have to cede all your free will. Because, you have to remove aberration for there to be utopia. And aberration is what makes us special, for better and for worse. Serial killers are an aberration. We'd like to do away with that. Well, in order to completely do away with that, we need to sterilize people mentally, from doing these things if we detect this in them. Well, is that really utopia? This is the big question that we saw in Minority Report, where if we can see the future and we can protect the future, we can prevent these crimes from happening. I think the biggest crime to that film is that they cut off the last line of that screenplay from the movie because they thought it was too harsh of an ending. But the end of Minority Report is literally the next year there were 163 murders in the District of Columbia. It was hey, we're not going to prosecute people from future crimes anymore. But guess what? Death is back. And murder is back on the table, boys. And that is very much something that, we're going to struggle with. There will be no utopia. In fact, that's the thing is we talk about Star Trek style utopia, but the genius of Star Trek is Earth has utopia. So we went into space and guess what? All the great adventures of a non-utopia are still there. So we get the best of both worlds. So we get all the non-utopia. We're at war with the Klingons and the Romulans while we get to be, but back home, everybody's fine. I don't think humans are capable of utopia, and I don't think it's possible to truly exist. And I don't think, Asimov wrote a great story about that. And I always forget what it's called because, maybe I do and I don't because there's two titles to it, and he hated the title. But one of the titles is Misbegotten Missionaries. And it's all about these aliens, these astronauts that go to a world and everything is peaceful and perfect except the plants and all the animal life that lives together and is all one homogenous thing are coming for them, trying to assimilate them. And what they don't realize is that this world is at a perfect equilibrium because it's all just one organism, all feeding each other. The animals feed off the fruit that drops from the trees and and continue the population out there, but it doesn't have this fighting back and forth like our world does. It's all one organism kind of doing its own thing, but nothing has freedom. Nothing is of its own mind. Everything exists within this and you get to exist, but this is what you get. This is what you eat. You have no choice. You have no autonomy. And I don't think that's utopia. So I think ultimately we're going to struggle with that the whole way. And it's going to be really hard. We're going to have a lot of bad times because, a permutation of a great quote by Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill once said, democracy is, he said, America always does the right thing after it's done everything else wrong. And I've always loved that quote because I think that's humanity. Humanity always ultimately does the right thing after we've exhausted every other option. And I think we will eventually come to something that if we look into the future, if the three of us step through a time portal right now and we're 150 years in the future, go, this place is great. And then we run into somebody go, I know, right? It's just a perfect world. I'm so depressed. I wish I lived in your world full of adventure. I want to be a cop and chase robbers and go on adventures like all the films that I watch. And we're like, what the hell is going on here? This is terrifying. And no, cops going and shooting people we made movies about that, but that was never good when that happened. No, you're idealizing this horrible past and thinking it's like the way we look at the Wild West. Like, oh, I would love to be, an outlaw in the wild. No, you don't. It's a terrible place. And no, it's fun for adventures. So I don't know what that future would look like. I know it's going to have its problems. And it's going to have things that are a lot better than we have now. And so, but ultimately, I think humanity will survive as long as we can figure out how to get off this rock before eventually the sun blows up. So, but what do we look like then? Are we entirely digital at that point? Or is humanity gone, but our essence lives on in these machines that we created and have propagated millions of years in the future? Maybe. But I think as our iteration, I think we're, for the most part in the future, going to survive.
Awesome.
Well, that's positive.
Yeah.
Yay. Humans.
It's funny how you talk about how people look back, because I'm watching Gen Z looking at early 2000s fashion right now with very fun nostalgia. I was like, no, don't bring it back.
Yeah, no. I mean, there's some of it that would be nice to come back. It's always great to watch some fashions come back, but there's always that thing like, no, don't do it, man. leave. You do not connect that chain to that wallet, my man. Do not do it. Nobody needs to see where your wallet is. No one cares. And then again, I'm saying that, and it's like, wallet, old man. What are you talking? I got it on the back of my phone, like it's a little sleeve that I put my card in. What are you talking about? But yeah,
So
it is interesting to watch as every generation like looks at things and goes, well, that's. I remember when my generation was like bell bottoms rock, and that was a mistake. But then chokers came back because chokers come back every 20 years, and chokers are amazing. I think chokers should always be in style. But then again, I grew up in the 90s, so what do I know? But yeah, it's always fascinating to see how we look back at that stuff.
But that could be a whole nother episode because I have a lot of things to say about 90s fashion, but we don't have the time for that. And we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. Cargill, what's next for you? Do you have any upcoming projects that you want to share with our listeners, or do we have any new books in the works?
Well, I'm making a movie right now. Back there's a couple of big famous movie stars. I'm making another movie with Scott Derrickson, another Crooked Highway adventure. This one is temporarily, we don't know if it's the final name, but it's called The Gorge. Stars Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy. And we haven't really talked about what it's about, but if you like Scott Derrickson and movies and C. Robert Cargill movies and books, then this is definitely up your alley. And very excited about that. Working on it. I haven't really talked about it much. It's something I'm doing in my off time right now. In what little off time I have, I'm writing a Sea of Rust novella. I'm setting another adventure in there. I'm not done with that world. I love that world very much. And I'm playing around with something else. I'm not ready to quite say what it is because I haven't quite fully finished it. So I may throw it out and start again. But I'm working on that right now, and that's coming up. And then Scott and I just kind of dicked around last year and made a cool short film that is part of the VHS series. And VHS 85 comes out later this year. It's the VHS series, for those of you that don't know, is a collection of short films by horror filmmakers that are all found footage. And this one is set in the year 1985, and it's all tapes that could have happened in 1985. And Scott and I made a short film called Dream Kill that we're really proud of. It's a lot of fun. We made a gnarly Friday night, midnight movie type of thing that no studio would ever let us make on a very shoestring budget. And it was us getting back to our roots, and we're really proud of that. So that you can see that later this year.
I love the VHS series. I'm excited for that.
That VHS 85, I've seen several of them. We're very proud of it. It should be a lot of fun. So that I think is premiering late fall and will be on Shudder to be able to be seen, and probably for rental if you don't have Shudder. And yeah, so that's pretty much what I've got going on that I'm allowed to talk about at the moment. But we've got lots of things in the hopper, and we're really excited for the next few years.
Awesome. That all sounds great. We can't wait to see. And honestly, I'm just excited to read the follow-up to Sea of Rust, Day Zero, which I hope to get my hands on really quickly. Because I think your nanny bot is like a cat. Is that what the cover looks like? It's like a cat that has smell.
He's a tiger.
He's a tiger. I was very glad there were no animals in your book.
The basic pitch of Day Zero is it's a nanny bot who is a anthropomorphic tiger, has to decide whether he wants to join the robot revolution and fight for his freedom or protect the boy that he's been programmed to love. And people have been like, wait, is this Calvin and Hobbes at the end of the world? And I'm like, yep, it absolutely is. 100%.
I'm sold. I'm going to read it.
So if you dug Sea of Rust and like its optimistic nihilism, and you like robot tigers, and you like Calvin and Hobbes, there are people that think Day Zero is the better book. And I love that people don't agree on that, because whenever you write a book that people are like, oh no, I still like this one better, it's like, great, I've done my job. People like one over the other, but like them both. So if you dug Sea of Rust, hopefully you'll dig Day Zero. And then we'll want to seek out this novella that I'm writing.
Awesome. Yes. Can't wait. That sounds so good. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking time with us today. We had a really great time talking to you. I mean, I can't speak for Daniel.
I had a great time. Yeah, it was really cool to meet you. Thanks for taking time, and it was really awesome talking with you.
Gave me a lot to think about with relation to the book, because I mean, if we could just deep dive with all of the authors of the books that we read.
Yeah.
I would really That would change my whole outlook on life.
Definitely. It's getting I'm going to reread it soon. So
it's guys, thank you for letting me do this. It's always a thrill to be able to do this because you don't always get to have that conversation. And what I'm finding is these podcasts and these things that we're recording are sticking around online for years, and people are able to find them later. And that, I've been able to go back and revisit several of my friends just by going back to this conversation we recorded 7 years ago while I was promoting a movie. And it's 2 hours of me and two friends in a room drinking whiskey, having a good time. But like here, getting to talk about this book and having readers be able to go, I wonder what Cargill meant by that. And then hearing me be able to talk about it. So thank you for giving me that opportunity to talk to some readers and give me something I can share with fans of the book that want to hear more about it. And thank you for turning people on to it. Librarians do an amazing, amazing job turning people on to books. We do not really exist without them. And so thank you guys for the service that you do, the job that you do, and the importance of it. And then choosing my book to be one of those books to share with people. Thank you very much. It means a lot.
The Wichita Public Library has entered the world of streaming with Canopy. Library card holders can now access Canopy's massive collection of movies, TV shows, and educational content from the great courses. There's content for children, adults, and foreign language options too. Card holders get 7 free checkouts a month, and Canopy's constantly updating their library, so there's always something new to watch. To find out more, please visit wichitalibrary.org/canopy, Kanopy. Canopy, just one of the many services provided to you from the Wichita Public Library.
Here are some reading recommendations for Category 1, a book with a non-human narrator from our community of readers in the Read ICT Facebook group. To join in on the fun, log into Facebook and search for the group #ReadICTChallenge and click Join. You can also find more reading recommendations for this and other categories by visiting wichitalibrary.org/readict. Want to submit your own reading recommendation to be featured on the podcast? Call our book review hotline at 316-261-8507. Leaving a review is easy. Just state your name, location if you are outside Wichita, category your recommendation is for, title and author of the book, and a brief reason why you recommend this book.
Watership Down by Richard Adams. I chose a book I never got around to reading in my youth, Watership Down by Richard Adams. I quite enjoyed it. As tends to be my habit these days, I listened to the audiobook, which was well done. After this book, I have an even greater adoration of the bunnies that come and eat in my backyard. Fox 8 by George Saunders. I recently read Fox 8 for the Non-Human Narrator category. It was written very phonetically, which was actually kind of fun to read. It's also very short, 48 pages. Fox 8 tells the story of his family and friends and how shocked and saddened they are to lose their homes to human development. The Magic Strings of Frankie Presto by Mitch Albom. I have a recommendation for Category 1, a non-human narrator book that is narrated by music. This is one of my very favorite books. It has so many elements that leave you thinking about it for a long time. The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Kate DiCamillo. If you've got kids doing the challenge, or you're like me and prefer the adventure of a kid's book over the mundane adult ones, one suggestion for non-human would be The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Kate DiCamillo. It's told from the perspective of a very unlucky toy rabbit. Doggone It by Spencer Quinn. Doggone It by Spencer Quinn turned out to have a fun dog narrator and private investigator human. When a book from my favorite genre fits the challenge, it's a bonus for me. Flush by Virginia Woolf. I chose this book because it's told from the perspective of the greatest, cutest, most noble type of animal ever to live, the Cocker Spaniel. This is probably a good time to point out that this review is definitely not being dictated to me by my Cocker Spaniel under the threat of duress, withholding of affection and obedience. Flush is a Cocker Spaniel who has been immortalized in verse by his owner, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. This biography is ultimately about the love and affection dogs have for their humans, despite humans often failing to be worthy of that love. Overall, this was an at times lovely and at times harrowing book about one dog's life, with a few insights into his fame as human.
Wow, who knew a robot apocalypse would give us so much to talk about?
I know, right? It actually really made me hyped up to read the sequel.
Yeah, and honestly, I might go back and reread certain parts because now I'm thinking about it in a completely different way.
Yeah, especially all he was talking about, them not having memory. So definitely, I'm going to check it out too.
But also, I really want to read about the nanny robot.
Yeah, some kind of anthropomorphic tiger robot. They're great. All right, so let's, I guess this is the end of the show, so let's read the credits, but we're going to do it in a robot voice.
A list of the books discussed in today's episode can be found in the accompanying show notes. To request any of the books heard about in today's episode, visit wichitalibrary.org or call 316-261-8500.
Thank you to C. Robert Cargill for talking with us today, even with a 6-hour time difference. We'd also like to thank those of you who shared recommendations for Category 1.
I can't do that anymore. It's really hard. This has been a production of the Wichita Public Library, and our big thanks goes out to our production crew and podcast team.
To participate in the Read ICT Reading Challenge, please visit wichitalibrary.org/readict. Stay connected with other Read ICT participants on the Read ICT Challenge Facebook page. Find out what's trending near you, post book reviews, look for local and virtual events, and share book humor with like-minded folks. To join the group, search #ReadICT Challenge on Facebook and click join.
See, if you were a robot, that would have been perfect and really boring.
Good point.
And don't forget to log your books in the reading tracker app Beanstack. Each month you log a book in the challenge, you're eligible to win fun prizes. If you need any assistance signing up or logging books, give us a call, reach us on chat, or stop by your nearest branch.
You can follow this podcast through the Anchor app or stream episodes on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe and share with all your friends. Have a good day.
Bye.